I never imagined that turning 80 would feel like this. I thought there would be candles, laughter, and maybe even a moment of pride. A sense that I had reached a milestone few are blessed to see. Instead, I sat in my bedroom staring at the door, realizing with horror that it had been locked from the outside. At first, I didn't believe it. I stood, shuffled across the floor, and twisted the handle, expecting it to open with ease. But it didn't. I pulled again, harder this time, and the truth hit me like a storm. My own son had locked me inside, on my birthday, on the day that was supposed to honor my life, my journey, my sacrifices. From downstairs, I heard the faint thump of music, the sound of glasses clinking, laughter, voices rising in celebration. For a moment, I thought maybe it was a mistake, that he had accidentally turned the key. But the longer I stood there, listening to the joy I wasn't allowed to be part of, the more I understood. He hadn't forgotten me. He had excluded me. He had decided that I wasn't meant to sit among them, that I wasn't presentable, that I was a burden even in the celebration of my own life. Tears blurred my vision as I pressed my ear to the door. I could hear footsteps, bursts of conversation, the sound of people singing. They were singing for me, and yet I was not there. My eyes burned as I thought of the irony, my name, my birthday, my age being honored in that room, while I was trapped like an inconvenience. What kind of gift was this? What kind of son looks at his mother and decides that silence is a better tribute than presence? I sat down slowly on the edge of my bed, the walls of the room closing in around me. My chest tightened as I thought of all the birthdays I had planned for him when he was a boy. The cakes I had baked with tired hands, the little surprises I had hidden to see his smile, the hours I had spent sewing costumes, decorating, making each celebration magical. Every year, I made sure he knew he mattered. And now, at 80, I was locked away, denied the simplest dignity of sitting at the table while others raised their glasses in my name. The betrayal was not in the lock alone. It was in the laughter I heard through the floorboards, in the way life went on without me just a few steps away. That was the part that crushed me most. I had spent 80 years surviving, building, loving, enduring, and in one act, my son made me feel invisible, as though all of it meant nothing. If this story touches you, take a moment to like this video and subscribe to the channel. Your support allows us to continue sharing powerful stories that remind us of dignity, love, and the strength of the human spirit. I wiped my tears with the back of my hand, staring at the closed door as if it were a wall between the life I had lived and the reality I now faced. The sound of laughter downstairs pierced me like a knife, each cheer and each song a reminder of my absence. My body shook, not just from age, but from the sheer disbelief that my own child could choose to erase me this way. I whispered into the empty room. Do they even notice I'm not there? Or have they convinced themselves that I am better locked away? But then something deeper stirred in me. A voice, not of despair, but of defiance. I thought of my late husband, of all the times he had told me that love is not weakness and silence is not surrender. I thought of the years I had endured hardship, loneliness, and sacrifice. And I realized that, even locked behind this door, I was not powerless. He thought that shutting me away would silence me, but he underestimated me. He thought locking me away would silence me, but he was wrong. My name is Dorothy, and today I am 80 years old. It feels strange to even say that number out loud, because in my heart, I still feel the same woman who once danced barefoot in the kitchen while stirring soup on the stove, who once hummed lullabies in the dark to calm a crying child, who once believed that love could protect her from anything. Time has left its marks on my skin, yes, but my spirit still carries every moment, every sacrifice, every dream I once gave to those I loved most. I am a widow now. My husband, the man who once placed a simple ring on my finger and promised to walk with me until the end, has been gone for many years. Yet his voice still lives within me, his smile, his words, his unwavering belief in family. They are the echoes that fill the silence when the world tries to make me feel small. I raised my children with hands that never knew rest. I gave them everything I could, even when I had nothing left for myself. I woke before dawn to prepare meals, to mend clothes, to stretch every coin so they would never feel the hunger or the shame that I once knew as a child. I celebrated every one of their birthdays, sometimes with cakes that leaned to one side, sometimes with candles that burned faster than expected, but always with joy that came straight from the heart. I never missed a chance to make them feel loved, to make them feel special. I believed that when love is given freely, it plants roots that last a lifetime. That is why this day, my 80th birthday, should have been different. This was not just a number to me. This was a triumph. It was proof that I had lived, that I had endured, that despite all the storms life threw my way, I was still here. Reaching 80 is not simply about aging, it's about surviving. It is about standing as a witness to decades of change, loss, love, and rebirth. It is about saying, I am still here, and my story is not finished. I thought my family would see this, that they would honor it. But the truth is, not everyone values the history that others carry. As I sat in that locked room, I remembered the birthdays when I was a girl, when there was no money for cakes or gifts, but my mother would sing me songs while brushing my hair, and I felt like the richest child in the world. I remembered the birthdays I spent as a young wife, when my husband and I had barely enough to pay rent, but he would find a way to bring me a flower, a small token to say, "You matter." I remembered the birthdays with my children, their tiny faces glowing in candlelight, their little hands clapping, their voices shouting happy birthday, Mama, with such joy that I thought my heart would burst. Those memories were the jewels of my life. They were what made me believe that love had been worth every sacrifice. And now, here I am, at 80, realizing that the son I raised never cherished those moments the way I did. To him, perhaps, they were just passing days, just obligations that faded with time. He never saw the hours I stayed up sewing buttons or writing notes for his lunchbox. He never noticed the way I skipped meals so that he would have seconds. He never valued the love that was poured into each celebration, each quiet act of care. It is a painful truth to face that the things most precious to you may mean little to someone else, even if that someone is your own child. But I refuse to let his blindness define me. I am Dorothy, 80 years strong, and my life is not measured by his disregard. My life is measured by the resilience I built, the love I gave, the moments I created. I know what I carried, I know what I endured, and I know what I deserve. Reaching this age is not a curse, it is a crown. It is proof that I survived losses that would have broken others. It is proof that I loved, even when love was not returned. It is proof that my voice still matters, even if my own son tried to silence it with a locked door. I think of my husband and how he would have celebrated this day. He would have stood proudly beside me, reminding everyone that a woman who has lived 80 years deserves to be honored, not hidden. he would have looked our son in the eye and asked him if he had forgotten who taught him to walk, who wiped his tears, who carried him when his legs grew tired. He would have reminded him that a mother is not an inconvenience. She is the foundation on which every success stands. So I speak these words now, not just for myself, but for every soul who has ever felt erased by those they loved most. I am not invisible. I am not a shadow. I am Dorothy, and I have lived a life worthy of being seen. And I know I am not alone, because there are so many like me, mothers, fathers, grandparents, who gave everything only to be treated as though their story no longer mattered. But we do matter. We always will. And now I ask you, listening to my story, if it were your parent, your grandparent, your elder, would you recognize their worth, or would you lock them away like a secret to be hidden? Because the answer says more about you than it does about them. When the door finally opened, I thought for a brief moment that maybe he had changed his mind, that maybe he had realized the cruelty of locking me away. But when my son stood there, leaning against the frame with that look of forced calmness on his face, I understood that mercy was not what brought him back to me. He wasn't there to invite me to my own birthday celebration. He was there to justify what he had done. "Mom," he began, his voice steady but without warmth. "I didn't want to upset you. It's better this way. Better this way." As if isolating me, silencing me, erasing me from the very moment that should have been mine was somehow an act of kindness. He went on, speaking slowly, as though I were too fragile to understand. "You know how people can be. They don't understand old age the way we do. I didn't want you to feel uncomfortable, to feel out of place." The words cut through me like glass. Out of place. In my own home. At my own celebration. Out of place in a life I had built with my bare hands. Did he not realize the absurdity of it? Did he not see the cruelty of calling exclusion a gift? He tried to package betrayal in soft tones and excuses, but I could see through him. This wasn't about protecting me. This was about protecting himself from embarrassment, from the truth that he saw me not as his mother anymore, but as a burden he could conveniently hide away. I looked at him, my son, the child I once held against my chest, the boy whose fever I stayed up all night to watch over, the teenager I defended when the world seemed too harsh. And now, that same boy, my boy, stood before me, telling me that I didn't belong in a room full of people gathered for me. He didn't even see the cruelty in it, or perhaps he did, and that was worse. As he spoke, I felt myself drift into memories. My husband's voice echoed in my mind, clear as if he were standing beside me again. I remembered the day he slid the ring onto my finger, his hand trembling with nerves and devotion. "With this," he whispered, "I promise you'll never be alone." He kept that promise until the day he died. Even in the moments of grief and struggle, I always felt him with me. That ring was more than gold. It was a vow carved into metal. And now here was our son, flesh of our flesh, making me feel more alone than I had ever felt in my life. My son's words kept pouring, excuses wrapped in polite tones. He said the guests wouldn't understand, that I would tire too easily, that I deserved to rest. Rest, when the whole house below me was alive with celebration. Rest, when all I wanted was to sit in the circle of family and friends, to laugh, to cry, to live the joy of 80 years honored. Rest was a prison, a padded excuse meant to soothe his own guilt. I listened, but inside me the pain grew louder than his words. It wasn't the lock that broke Mitt, was the indifference. It was the way he spoke, as though my absence didn't matter. As though my memories, my love, my sacrifices were just footnotes in a story that belonged to him now. He could not see that by locking me away, he hadn't only shut a door. He had shut out the very essence of what family means. It wasn't to hurt you, Mom, he said finally, placing his hand on the doorframe like a man already convinced of his own righteousness. It's just, they came here for me. For us, you wouldn't understand. Wouldn't understand. The phrase echoed in my chest like a thunderclap. The truth spilt between his words. This party wasn't about me. It was about him, his pride, his desire to shine without the shadow of an aging mother beside him. He wasn't afraid I wouldn't fit in. He was afraid I would remind everyone of what he had forgotten, that he wasn't self-made, that every step of his success had been built on my back, on my sleepless nights, on my sacrifices. And so I sat, listening, absorbing, while his words tried to rewrite my place in the story of his life. But I knew the truth. I am Dorothy. I am 80 years of survival, of love, of resilience. I am not an inconvenience to be explained away. And no excuse, no matter how gently spoken, can disguise the cruelty of betrayal. So now I turn this question to you, who hears my voice. If your own child locked you away, not out of malice, but out of convenience, and then looked you in the eye with excuses wrapped in silk, would you forgive? Or would you see it for what it truly is, a wound deeper than any lock, sharper than any betrayal? The door closed again, and the sound of the latch echoed louder than any word he had spoken. I sat there, frozen, listening as his footsteps faded away, replaced by the swell of music drifting up from the floor below. Laughter followed, overlapping voices, clinking glasses, the hum of celebration, my birthday celebration. But I was not part of it. I was locked away, like an afterthought, a relic too fragile to stand among the living. Silence filled the room once his words faded from memory, but it was not the comforting silence of peace. It was the silence of exclusion, the silence of betrayal. There is nothing quite as cruel as being within reach of joy but barred from touching it. The walls carried every sound from downstairs, and each one pierced me like a blade. A toast was raised. My name was not spoken. A burst of applause erupted, yet not one hand clapped for me. The cruelest part was not the lock on the door, was the sound of life carrying on without me, as though I were invisible. I sat on the edge of the bed, my hands clasped in my lap, staring at the wrinkles etched into my skin. These hands had built a family, had carried babies, had cooked meals, had cleaned messes, had comforted tears. And now they trembled, not from age, but from the weight of being discarded. How strange to feel like a ghost in the house where I once ruled as the heart. In the stillness, I began to speak to him, my husband, my companion, the man who would never have allowed this. Can you believe what he has done to me? I whispered into the empty air. I imagined him sitting beside me, his hand warm against mine, his eyes steady with the kind of love that never wavered. I could almost hear his voice, low and resolute. Dorothy, you matter. Don't ever doubt it. His absence was sharp tonight, sharper than on any other day, because I knew if he had been here, none of this would have happened. He would have stood for me, demanded my place, reminded our son that a mother is not to be hidden. But he wasn't here, and so the silence became my only company. I thought back to the years when our home was filled with laughter that belonged to me. The birthdays when my children would rush to the kitchen table, faces glowing with candlelight, eyes wide with wonder. I remembered their small voices singing for me, off-key but full of love. Those moments had been my treasure, the proof that all my sacrifices meant something. Now, that treasure felt stolen, not by strangers, but by the very people I gave my life to. The party below grew louder. I heard music change to a faster rhythm, glasses clinking again, cheers rising with each toast. I imagined the smiles, the embraces, the pride in my son's voice as he entertained guests, free from the shadow of his mother's age. Did he believe my presence would shame him? Did he believe 80 years of living, of loving, of surviving, could be reduced to something so shameful it must be hidden away? I pressed my hands to my chest, as if to hold my heart together. The silence inside this room was suffocating, not because there were no sounds, but because there were too many that reminded me of what I had lost. The silence of betrayal is heavier than any noise. It seeps into your bones, convincing you that maybe you don't matter, maybe you truly are better off forgotten. And yet, deep down, I knew the truth. I had mattered once, and I still mattered now. The problem was not MIT, was him. Still, the ache grew unbearable. I whispered again to my husband, "Tell me, did we fail? Did we raise him wrong? Or is this what love always risks, that you give everything, only to be erased?" I wanted an answer, but the only reply was the muffled roar of the party, proof that life was going on without me. I shifted to the window and stared at the night sky. Stars glittered above, distant but unyielding, and for a moment I felt kinship with them. I, too, had burned brightly once. I, too, had been a source of warmth. Now, like the stars, I was still shining, but too far away for anyone to notice. And then it struck me. This was not just about me. This was about every elder who has ever been silenced, every parent who has ever been dismissed, every grandparent treated as though their worth ended with their youth. I was living the silence of betrayal, but I was not alone in it. So I ask you, who listens to me now, what is worse, to be insulted with cruel words, or to be erased by silence? Which wound cuts deeper? The one shouted in anger, or the one carved in quiet disregard? Hours passed, though I could not measure them except by the changing tone of the voices downstairs. At first, the laughter was sharp and wild, the kind of energy that only comes at the start of a celebration. Later, it dulled into a steady rhythm, conversations layered over music, footsteps crossing the wooden floor, the occasional burst of clapping. And then, just when I thought the night might finally end, I heard something that made my heart pound against my ribs. Someone was calling my name. At first, I thought I had imagined it. My name, Dorothy, floating faintly up the staircase, cutting through the noise. Then again, louder this time, and again, until I could tell that it was more than one voice. Guests, wondering aloud, "Where is she? Isn't this her birthday?" I pressed my ear against the door, my chest trembling. It had taken them this long to notice my absence, but at least they were asking now. I prayed that someone would come upstairs, that someone would see the locked door and realize the cruelty of what my son had done. And then, as though the heavens answered, I heard the shuffle of feet climbing the staircase. The voices grew closer, muffled at first, then clearer. "Dorothy, are you resting? We've been waiting to see you." My throat tightened. I opened my mouth to answer, but no sound came out. How do you tell someone that your own child has imprisoned you in your own home? The doorknob rattled. A pause. then a sharp gasp. "It's locked," someone whispered. Another voice, incredulous. "Locked? Why would it be locked?" In that moment, the truth began to unravel, thread by thread. The door shook with knocks, then pounding. My son's voice rose from below, sharp and commanding, telling them to leave it, that I was too tired, that I needed my rest. But his excuses no longer sounded gentle, they sounded desperate. The guests, once merry and compliant, began to murmur. Their voices carried suspicion, confusion, and something stronger, outrage. One of them, a family friend who had known me since I was a young bride, spoke with authority. "This is her day. She deserves to be with us. Open this door." The sound of my son's hesitation was deafening. He tried again to justify himself, to weave the same excuse he had given me earlier, but it was too late. The people downstairs had heard enough. Keys jingled, a lock turned, and suddenly, light burst into the room as the door swung wide. I blinked against the glow from the hallway, tears spilling down my cheeks. For the first time that night, I was seen. Faces filled the doorway, neighbors, friends, distant relatives all staring in disbelief. At the sight of me sitting there, alone, while the party had raged below, gasps filled the air, questions flew. My son's name was whispered like a curse. Why would he do this? How could he? And in that moment, I didn't need to speak. The truth was written all around me, in the lock, in the silence, in the lines of sorrow etched into my face. They understood, without words. I stood, slowly, my legs trembling, but steady enough to carry me forward. I stepped past the threshold, and the hallway seemed to expand with every breath I took. I wasn't invisible anymore. My presence itself was a protest, a living truth that no excuse could erase. As I descended the stairs, the entire room fell silent. Dozens of eyes watched me, their shock giving way to something else in guard. Not at me, but at the man who had thought he could silence me. My son stood near the table, his face pale, his smile forced and brittle. He tried to speak, to explain, but the words died in his throat. The guests, no longer looked at him with admiration or respect. They looked at him with disappointment, with judgment, with condemnation. Every excuse he had used now crumbled under the weight of their stares. And in that silence, I realized something profound. The truth always finds its way out. You can lock a door, but you cannot lock away dignity. You can silence a voice, but you cannot silence the weight of 80 years of life. My son thought he could rewrite the story, but the truth revealed itself, raw and undeniable, for all to see. As the night carried on, I said little. I didn't need to. My presence was enough. The guests surrounded me, offering embraces, their eyes filled with pity and fury. And in the corner of the room, my son stood alone, realizing too late the depth of his mistake. So now I ask you, if the truth about betrayal were revealed in front of everyone you know, would you stand in shame like my son, or would you stand in honor like the one who survived it? The silence in that room after I stepped down the stairs was unlike anything I had ever felt before. Dozens of faces stared, their eyes darting between me and an 80-year-old woman whose birthday had become a cage, and my son, the man who had dared to lock me away. In that stillness, truth weighed heavier than any speech could. My son's pride, his charm, his carefully constructed image crumbled in the space of a heartbeat. He opened his mouth to speak, but no one wanted to hear him anymore. The first voice that rose was not mine. It came from the back of the room, a friend who had known me since my youth. Dorothy, you should have been at the center of this evening, not hidden like a secret. Her words pierced the air, and murmurs of agreement rippled through the crowd. Another guest added, "What kind of son locks his mother away on her own birthday?" Each word struck my son like a hammer blow, stripping away the excuses he had once delivered so easily. I watched his face shift from confidence to panic. He tried to raise his hands, tried to reason with them, but the crowd had tasted the truth and would no longer swallow his lies. She needed rest, he said weakly, the same excuse he had used on me. But now, spoken aloud in front of witnesses, it sounded cruel. It sounded hollow. One by one, the people who had come to celebrate began to turn not against me, but against him. Their stares carried judgment, their voices carried condemnation. "We came here for Dorothy," one relative said firmly, "not for you to play host while hiding her away." The weight of their anger filled the room, and for the first time in years, I saw my son reduced to silence. He stood there, his shoulders heavy, his eyes darting around for someone to defend him. But no one did. I sat slowly at the table where the cake had been waiting, untouched. 80 candles flickered in the soft light, and the irony struck me. The cake had been displayed all evening, but the woman it was meant to honor had been locked away. My hand trembled as I reached for a chair, but before I could pull it out, one of the guests hurried to help me. That small gesture broke the tension, and suddenly, people were moving, guiding me to my place at the head of the table, surrounding me with warmth that my son had tried to deny me. The sound of their voices changed. No longer did I hear laughter that excluded me, but laughter that embraced me. Their words, their presence, restored something inside me that my son's betrayal had tried to steal: dignity. I realized then that even if he had locked the door, he had not locked the hearts of those who still knew my worth. My son stood on the sidelines, his face a mask of shame. And as I looked at him, I felt a mixture of sorrow and strength. He had expected obedience, silence, invisibility. Instead, what he created was a revolt against his own cruelty. He had underestimated me, underestimated the love that still surrounded me, underestimated the truth that even 80 years of quiet sacrifice cannot be erased by one act of betrayal. The room seemed to shift that night. It was no longer his stage, it became mine again. The candles flickered as voices called for me to make a wish. I leaned forward, the light reflecting in my tears, and for a brief moment, I closed my eyes. I did not wish for riches, or for youth, or even for forgiveness. I wished for courage for myself, for anyone who had ever been silenced by those closest to them. When I opened my eyes, I saw the faces leaning toward me, their smiles genuine, their respect restored. And then I saw my son, standing apart, realizing too late what he had lost: his reputation, his pride, his carefully guarded image, all shattered because he tried to erase me from the very story I had written with my sacrifices. And in that instant, I knew the turning point wasn't just for me. It was for everyone watching, for everyone who understood that cruelty disguised as care is still cruelty. It was the moment they all saw the truth, the moment when silence was broken, the moment when the locks that held me no longer mattered. So I ask you now, if you were in that room, would you have stood silent beside my son? Or would you have raised your voice for the dignity of a woman who had given her life for her family? That night, as I sat at the head of the table with 80 candles burning before me, I felt something I had not felt in years: vindication. The faces surrounding me glowed in the light, their smiles a mixture of relief and apology. They had come expecting a celebration led by my son, but they discovered the truth that he had tried to erase me, silence me, lock me away. And now, with their eyes fixed on me, I realized he had failed. My voice trembled at first, but it grew steadier with every word I spoke. I was not supposed to be here tonight, I told them. Gasps rose around the table, but I lifted my hand to quiet them. My son believed that locking me in a room was better than allowing me to sit among you. He said it was to protect me, to give me rest. But we all know the truth. It was to hide me. The silence that followed was heavy. Yet it was not the silence of betrayal anymore. It was the silence of people listening, truly listening. I looked at each of them, and in their eyes, I saw the reflection of my worth. My son shifted uneasily in the corner, but for the first time, his presence no longer had power over me. I thought of all the years I had sacrificed, the sleepless nights, the scraped knees I bandaged, the meals I cooked, the endless hours of labor and love poured into raising him. Those memories were mine, unshakable, and no locked door could erase them. He had tried to silence my presence, but he could never silence the truth of who I am. My husband's words echoed in my mind again. Dorothy, you matter. Don't ever doubt it. Tonight, I finally understood what he meant. My worth was not measured by how others treated me, but by the life I had lived, the love I had given, the resilience that kept me standing at 80 years old. I was not fragile glass to be hidden, I was fire, burning still, even after so many seasons had passed. I raised my glass, my hand steady now, to life. I said, my voice clear, to 80 years of surviving, loving, and still having a voice. The guests erupted in cheers, their voices rising in harmony with mine. And in that moment, I was not invisible. I was the center, as I always should have been. Yet, as the laughter and celebration swelled around me, my eyes found my son again. He stood apart, his shoulders hunched, his pride stripped bare. For a moment, I almost pitied him. But then I remembered the lock, the silence, the cruel excuse he had given me. I remembered the loneliness of sitting in that room, listening to joy I could not touch. And I knew that forgiveness, if it ever came, would not come easily. What he had done was not just about MIT, was about what happens when we silence the people who gave us life, when we pretend their voices no longer matter. Tonight was proof that no matter how tightly someone tries to close a door, the truth will always find its way through the cracks. As the candles flickered, I leaned closer and blew them out in one long breath. The room erupted in applause, but inside me, a quiet resolve took root. My son had tried to silence me, but my voice carried louder than ever. He had tried to erase me, but in the attempt, he had etched me deeper into the hearts of everyone present. And now, I turn to you, the one hearing my story. Tell me, if someone tried to silence you, to erase your worth, would you accept the lock? Or would you find the strength to remind the world that your voice cannot and will not be silenced? When the last candle had been blown out and the applause faded into gentle murmurs, I sat there, surrounded by faces that finally saw me again. My body was tired, but my spirit felt lighter than it had in years. I had endured something I never thought possible, betrayal on the very day meant to celebrate my life, but I had also been reminded that even in darkness, truth has its own way of shining through. As I looked around the room, I felt gratitude swelling inside me, not for the decorations or the music or the cake, but for the realization that I was still standing. At 80 years old, I had been treated as though my voice no longer mattered. Yet here I was, speaking louder than ever. I thought of my husband, of the promises we once shared, and I knew he would have been proud. Proud that I did not let silence define me. Proud that I chose to rise. Proud that even with tears on my cheeks, I still carried dignity in my heart. The truth is, growing older is not a weakness, it is a victory. Every wrinkle on my face is a story, every line a memory of love, sacrifice, and survival. Too often, people believe that age means irrelevance, that the elderly are meant to sit quietly in corners while life passes them by. But that is a lie. We do not lose our worth with years, we gain it. We do not become invisible, we become timeless. My son's actions wounded me, yes, but they also revealed something powerful. He could not take away my story. He could not erase the decades I had lived, the battles I had fought, the love I had poured into this family. His lock did not break. MIT reminded me of the strength I had always carried. And tonight, that strength became visible again, not just to me, but to everyone who witnessed. The truth, faith has a way of guiding us even when we feel abandoned. Sitting alone in that room, I prayed silently for strength, and I believe that prayer was answered when the voices downstairs began asking for me. That was no coincidence. That was grace. It was as though God Himself whispered into their hearts, reminding them that you cannot celebrate life while hiding the one who lived it. That divine nudge unlocked the door long before the key ever did. I want to leave you with this. Never allow anyone to silence your voice. No matter your age, no matter your circumstances, you carry within you a story that deserves to be heard. Do not shrink yourself to fit the comfort of others. Do not allow fear, shame, or betrayal to convince you that your life has lost its value. Stand tall, even when locked away. Speak, even when others try to hush you. Believe, even when hope feels distant. Because the truth is, your voice matters. Your presence matters. Your life matters. If my story tonight has touched you, if it has reminded you of your own strength or the strength of someone you love, then carry it with you. Share it. Let it be a light in moments when silence tries to weigh you down. And remember this: silence may hurt, but it can never erase truth. Now I turn to you. If you were in my place, on your milestone birthday, would you have accepted the silence? Or would you have fought for your voice? Tell me, 'cause your story might be the spark that gives courage to someone else. And before you go, don't forget to show your support. Like this video, subscribe to the channel, and stay close. Because the next story I will share is one that will challenge the very way you see family, loyalty, and love. You won't want to miss it.